They say hunting and fishing can be dated back more than 2 million years. Throughout the years, the historic angler and hunter has steadily evolved into the avid hunter and angler that we know and love today. Welcome to the Outdoor Defiance podcast. As you listen, you will hear comical stories, companies talking about their products, researchers talking about their research, and overall ways to help you become a better outdoorsman. Welcome to today's episode.
What's up, everybody? In today's podcast episode, we got to sit down with Kip Adams of the National Deer Association. He's the lead conservationist with them, and we were very excited to get to sit down with him and talk deer management. Some of the different things that we got into in this podcast were about antler growth and what that entails. We talked about the green up and the different things that you can do management-wise on your properties. We talked about how anybody can do different things. Maybe on a budget. We talked about his mission to spread education and different places that you can maybe meet up with him and do some of these little management classes that he can put on. And overall, it was just an amazing conversation. And I hope you get to learn a little bit of something, because we learned a whole lot. And I hope you can take away some of these tactics from this episode and maybe be able to implement them on your said property. So without further ado, Kip Adams, enjoy.
Well, Kip, thank you for hopping on today for this episode. I think there's some key points we're going to cover here that a lot of people don't know, including myself. We hear about it, but we just don't know the science behind it. So no better guy to bring on than you to answer this, but thanks for joining us today.
Oh, man, thank you, guys. I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to having a good conversation.
Absolutely. So, Kip, let's introduce yourself and kind of tell us how you got started in the outdoors and where you are now for anyone that doesn't know.
Sure. My name's Kip Adams. I'm the Chief Conservation Officer for the National Deer Association. Basically, what that means is I'm a wildlife biologist. I have the great job of overseeing all of our conservation department's programs, all the educational opportunities that we do. Anything that's involved with conservation through the NDA gets to run past me. So I get my hands in a lot, and I'm very fortunate with that. But I grew up in northern Pennsylvania, grew up in a very rural area on a dairy farm. So we were outside all the time, and grew up in a hunting family. My dad, my grandparents, my uncles, my cousins, my friends, like everybody I knew hunted. And I didn't realize how unique that was at the time, but I have since learned that very different today. It's not like that. Most people don't grow up in that environment today. But I grew up in a very pro-hunting environment. We had land because we had the farm, but from an early age, my father always made sure that I realized we're lucky to get to hunt here, but it's our responsibility to take care of this. This is not just a consumptive, let's go and shoot deer and turkeys and all that. It is our responsibility to take care of this land, to leave it better than we have it, and to make sure that, we run a good farm, but also we take care of all the wildlife that's on it. So I think that's probably where the interest in being a wildlife biologist came from. So I knew at an early age, man, if I can make a living being a wildlife biologist, that is for me. So that was the career path. I've been in wildlife now either as a researcher or a deer researcher or manager. It's pushing 30 years, guys. And I don't feel anywhere near old enough to have been doing something for that long, but conducted research for the University of New Hampshire in graduate school, worked for the state agency in Florida. Right after school, I worked for New Hampshire Fish and Game as their deer and bear biologist for a couple of years. And then I came to what was formerly the QDMA, which is now the National Deer Association. And that was just over 22 years ago. So I've been in the NGO world a long time. I love the fact that I get to travel across Whitetails Range and work with hunters and landowners and state wildlife agencies across the United States. I'm very blessed to get to meet some good people, get to help them enhance habitat and have better hunting opportunities and influence deer in a positive manner. So I'm a lucky man for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a full circle moment. My dad actually got me started in the outdoors, but the deer management side has 100% been him. And I should say my dad, my brother, and my family got me in the outdoors, but the deer management has totally been my dad. And I was on the phone with him when I was driving a little bit ago, and I was telling my podcast. I told him who it was, and he's like, "That's crazy." He's like, "I used to tell you stuff that guy used to say when you were a kid about what we were doing and why we were doing it." So it's kind of cool, full circle moment to hear that. So yeah, so it got me a little excited, and he was like, "I'm ready for this episode." So,
Oh, good deal, man. That sounds great.
but so if Gunner and I are like the next generation, what I'd like to say the next generation of the hunters, and I feel like our generation knows some of the whys, but we don't know the science. We hear a lot of the myths behind it, and so I feel like a lot of people our age don't understand that it's really important, and the older people, also with talking to them, but they don't understand the importance of deer management through the spring and summer. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today with you. So if you would just kind of let's dive into, what are some of the key points this time of year moving into summer versus, what are the key points of getting your deer healthy and the maximized nutrition they need versus just go putting out a deer corn feeder September and saying you're feeding your deer.
Yeah. You're right. So many hunters, think about, what's going on in the fall, when we're chasing deer, or folks who are, planting food plots or managing habitat, think about, okay, what are we going to do during the summer for summer plots? And we're going to make sure we have some attraction plots in the fall. What they fail to realize is right now, like literally April through June are the most critical months of the year for white-tailed deer. This is when your habitat should be absolutely rocking. And the reason for that is does are entering the third trimester, of pregnancy. That's when they put almost all the energy into that fetal growth. So that's when does need a lot of high quality nutrition. Then fawns are going to start hitting the ground. And when does start lactating, that is the most energetically expensive thing that deer do. That costs more nutrition than anything else. And of course, bucks now are starting to grow their antlers. So, we often think of, let's give bucks some food for antler growth, but the amount of nutrition that it takes to grow antlers pales in comparison to the doe side. So, antlers get all the credit or most of the credit, and, people like to see that. But, if you really want to take care of a deer herd and you want to manage things appropriately, you obviously need to think of the doe side too. And you need to hit that spring window when food plots really are providing nothing or almost nothing right now. Now, if you're planting winter cereal grain like winter wheat or winter rye, yes, those are one of the first things that greens up. That's going to provide some stuff. But even before our clovers and some of the other things green up, most things that people plant this time of year for deer, they're not even, you're not even planting until the end of April or into May. And, it's providing very little until you're well into June. So you've already missed that window. So first thing is recognizing the importance of making sure you have a bunch of high quality food right now. The second thing is, okay, what am I going to do about it to make sure that I have it? Those winter wheat, winter rye plants like that, yes, that provides some, but by far the best way to provide food this time of year is to manage for early successional vegetation. These are like the old fields that we talk about. We're not managing for woody stuff, it's not young trees, but it's herbaceous plants in these old fields. And essentially we're looking for broadleaf plants. In general, deer, there's very few grasses that deer like. Deer would much prefer broadleaf. So when we manage these old fields for early successional vegetation, it's very inexpensive for us to do. It's pretty easy to do. It provides great cover for deer. It provides good hunting opportunities. But the biggest thing is it provides awesome food, and it provides that food at the right time of the year, which is right now, a spring green up.
Let's take a break from this podcast and talk about some awesome products.
Hey folks, let me tell you about GritKnives. They're not just your average knife company. They're all about high quality, affordable, and unique products that'll make your outdoor adventures legendary. From limited edition pocket knives to rugged fixed blades and precision scalpels, they've got it all. Plus, their logo wear will have you repping the brand wherever you go. So whether you're out in the field or tackling everyday tasks, trust GritKnives to be your go-to for top-notch gear that won't break the bank.
Are you looking for some of the best sounding turkey calls on the market? Then look no farther than JAG Calls. Since 2022, Team OD has been using their calls and have had great success doing so. Two of my personal favorite calls are the Mother Clucker and the America. And I mean, if it has a name like that, it must be good. Check out JAG Calls, that's JAG Calls, out at jagcalls.com. Hey, and while you're at checkout, use OD 2024 for a discount. Once again, OD 2024 for your discount.
Now let's get back to today's episode.
So going back on doe health, I've always been told, if the does aren't healthy, or I shouldn't say always, it's just kind of new to me, but they always say if the doe's health isn't at its peak, then it can potentially affect the baby in its, genetics. Is that true?
Well, it's not. The nutritional part of the doe is not going to have anything to do with the genetics of the deer or of its fawn. It can absolutely impact what we call epigenetics, which is essentially it sets the stage for how high the bar can be for that fawn. But it's not changing genes. It's just basically flipping more switches to allow that fawn to get bigger, as it grows. So the nutritional part of the doe is less about genetic part, but it's far more, just about the health of that fawn, because you take a doe that's in one area that has a lot of food, take another doe in an area where food is very limited. The quality of both of those does' milk is exactly the same. So a doe that's fed better doesn't have higher quality milk, but what she does have is a lot more milk. So she is able to feed way more milk to her fawn or fawns, which allows them to grow much faster so they can avoid predators much faster. They get much bigger that first summer and going into that first fall, which means survival is higher. So that's where we really need to concentrate, make sure they have lots to eat so that they can be the best mother they absolutely can, and then give that fawn every chance, to express all of its genetic potential and grow as quickly as possible during that first 6 months of life.
So what are some things, we can do to make sure that nutrition is there? Are you talking about burning or, what are some things there?
Yep. From a habitat standpoint, we want to make sure that, first of all, we have herbaceous material. So we can't have all woods. That's not helping us. So many people think, oh, geez, you have to have a bunch of woods or a bunch of forests for deer. And deer can certainly live in that, but that is one of the lowest quality vegetation types a deer can have, especially from a nutritional standpoint. You don't need to have all open either. So it's nice to have a mix of those, but it's absolutely advantageous to have some of these old field areas, these old, whether it's agricultural fields or old food plots or whatever it is, that are dominated by herbaceous plants. So no woody stuff. We haven't hit the woody successional stage yet. If you leave these old fields go, they will become woody in the future, which we don't want. We want to keep it into that early successional stage. So essentially, we're talking herbaceous plants. It essentially tell there's literally hundreds of herbaceous plants that deer like, but we're talking things like ragweed, jewelweed, or asters, goldenrod, a lot of the flowering plants. Those are the things that are so high in minerals, so high in, in protein and nutrition for deer. So we want to have areas with those, first of all. So once we have those, then we need to maintain those in herbaceous plants. So that's where you get into things like, yes, we can use prescribed fire to keep them there, to keep those from becoming woody. We can use disking during the dormant season. We can use herbicides. There's lots of different things we can do to maintain early successional vegetation. But the first part is, hey, let's get it into that early successional vegetation and have those fields dominated by broadleaf plants as opposed to grasses or woody plants.
So is there a way, like someone, if I know you said in Pennsylvania, right? Is that where you live?
Yep, I live in northern Pennsylvania.
So say someone in Oklahoma or someone is in Kansas, is there a way, that of that they can look up to see what plants they need this time of year?
Absolutely. And, most state wildlife agencies, can provide a list of preferred plants in those areas. The good thing is that many of the plants that the deer eat are present in a lot of the U.S. So, for example, I live in northern PA. I can take the top 10 to 20 plants that I would find in early successional vegetation or these old fields on my place. You will have all or most of those where you are in Oklahoma. I work in 20 to 25 different states a year, and it is amazing to me how some of the plants, you know, that are so preferred travel well through the whitetails range. Like ragweed. Ragweed is one of the top plants here. Same with you. Blackberry, same for me. Same with you. You know, the asters, oldfield aster, you know, calico aster. There's lots of different ones. So with those, you know, it's not really a state specific thing. You know, those plants are wide ranges. The best manual on this, Dr. Craig Harper from the University of Tennessee, has a book that he published on food plots and early successional vegetation. The back of that has a large appendix, a large reference section on early successional vegetation, and great pictures with the ones that are most important for deer, or some of the ones that are most important for deer. So that's a great photo reference for people to be able to look at and see. But anyway, you can find that on our National Deer Association's website. We have all kinds of articles on early successional vegetation where we show many different plants, but lots of different ways to be able to get your hands on those. But in general, even if folks don't know what they are, in general, if you have an old field and you use an herbicide or some other technique to get rid of grasses and have broadleaf plants, you have automatically made that better for deer. So very, very simple to do.
So you kind of touched on the nutrition aspect. What do you think the next most crucial part of a deer's health would be for someone who's just kind of getting into trying to manage their own land? Like you said, you touched on the nutrition. What are the other things people can kind of do to better their habitat on their said piece?
One thing is take a look at, hey, let's make sure we have good cover. And you know what? If I could either have an area that had awesome food and no cover versus awesome cover and no food, I would take the awesome cover every time. Because if you have food, you know, deer will be on there and they're going to eat it, but it might all occur at night. So that's not helping you from a hunting end at all. So I always start with cover, and I make darn sure that I have really good cover. If you're managing a habitat for deer, you should be able to know where deer will be bedding on that property at any hour of the day. If I come visit you right now, you should be able to take me and show me where deer are bedding. And it doesn't matter if it's 7 in the morning, 10 in the morning, noon, 2 in the afternoon, 4, whatever. You should be able to take me and say, you know what? See this block of cover right here? I guarantee you deer are bedding in that. That's what a good habitat manager will do. So many people managing habitat will do a little bit of habitat work, and they might have like a nice little thick area, but the scale isn't big enough to really impact deer. So you may get one deer bedding there or a couple deer, but it needs to be larger to the point where at any point of the day you can go there. I am always thinking of this on this order of 5 to 15 acre blocks, minimum of 5 acres of good cover. If you have a half an acre of good cover, sure, deer will use it. 1 acre, yeah, deer will use it, but it's just too easy to be able to blow them out of there or to have them be spooked. If you have 5 acres of good cover, now you are talking. That is scale enough where suddenly you can really influence how deer are going to use that block or that property. And then if you know where they're going to bed, you can then design food away from that. You're going to be able to hunt them in between the two. And now you can start having really good hunting opportunities. So, Gunnar, that's my thing. Let's make sure we have really good cover. And from a nutritional standpoint, let's make sure that we have food as close to year-round as possible. I just described why it's so important to have that in the spring. But then we want to continue to have good food all summer while those does are lactating and fawns are growing and while bucks are growing. And then let's make sure we can get them as heavy as possible during the fall. Because you know what? Deer survive winter very similar to the way that black bears do. They just don't hibernate, but they live off that fat during the winter that they accumulated during the summer and fall. So that's the way they evolve. You take deer that are behind a fence, they're going to lose weight during the winter. Even when the feeders are full, they will lose weight because they're designed to get as heavy as they can in the fall, live off that fat during the winter. So as deer managers, we want to make sure, let's have good food in the spring. All right, now let's transition and make sure we have good food for them in the summer, good food available in the fall, and then anything that we can in the winter. They're not growing in the winter, but let's make sure that we have food, oftentimes browse, where they at least can fill their stomachs one of the byproducts of food digestion is heat is given off. That allows deer to maintain body temperature without having to use as much of that fat reserve. So, they don't need awesome food in the winter. They just need some food to continue to be able to fill their stomachs, be able to digest that, and then just slow the use of that fat. So let's have good cover, and let's have food as close to year round as possible, making absolutely sure we have it spring, summer, and fall.
I think that's where people miss the mark is they look at that broadleaf and they're like, that's a weed, they don't think about the benefits to just the array across the landscape. And people think management is, I'm just going to throw up a deer feeder or, put a pile of corn down and I'm feeding my deer. That's, people don't realize that it's like I'm trying to think of an analogy here, but it's a constant battle, really. You just have to keep managing and keep doing the things that you need to keep doing. And that's where people miss the mark, I think.
Absolutely. And you know what? I referenced Dr. Harper from the University of Tennessee earlier. He and his students are doing such groundbreaking work on early successional vegetation. Mm-hmm. And what we're realizing is, some of the biggest deer in the country now, and some of the people doing the best job are growing those on, weeds. And I use weeds in quotes here because it's broadleaf plants like ragweed, jewelweed, pokeweed, things, that have the weed at the end of it. And people look at it and be like, we call that a weed. Those are the things that are so high in calcium and phosphorus and magnesium, in protein. And of course, we've already mentioned they're available in the spring, but literally those are the things that make or break, bucks at the big end, of the range of what they're able to do. Those are the things that are putting so much, nutrition into a doe's body where she is just, greatly increasing the amount of milk that she can provide. So, in many cases, you can grow or have more high quality nutrition in those areas than a lot of people can in a food plot. And it's not costing you anything, or at least it's costing pennies, relative to a food plot. It's available over a much wider time period, and it's available at the right time of the year. So that's one of the reasons that I have personally on our Pennsylvania farm taken many acres out of food plots over the last 10 years and put them into early successional vegetation, specifically to have spring food, more food during the year, that awesome cover, and then, just the icing on the cake is it provides incredible hunting opportunities along with it. So everything is good about managing for early successional vegetation.
So I've always heard the greenbriers are pretty good at a certain time of year, and then also, if I remember right, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, poison ivy can be pretty good at a certain time of year. Can you touch?
That's absolutely right. They both are. Yep. So greenbrier grows, all through the South and up into, the mid-South. Actually, it gets up into the mid-Atlantic states. High quality for deer. Deer love it. Easy to grow. Poison ivy, certainly not good for us. Deer love poison ivy. High quality food, grows across much of the whitetails range, and deer absolutely love it. That's one of the reasons if you're ever doing stomach analysis for deer, you're pulling the food out of the rumen, and you can put that in a sieve and wash it. And that's a good way to look at exactly what deer were eating, doing like a food habit or, just checking to see at the skin and shed. Yeah. If you're in poison ivy area, you should always do that with a pair of gloves on because lots of people I know have had major poison ivy infestation, by grabbing that with their hand because all those oils in there from where, deer were eating poison ivy, like really magnifies the intensity of it. So, but yeah, deer love poison ivy, very much preferred food.
So on the greenbriers, is it good like year round, or is it when it's just shooting up during the spring?
It's a lot better, early in the growing season there. But the nice thing about broadleaf plants like that, the most nutritious parts are the new growth. Mm-hmm. So at any point of the year that's growing newer, smaller leaves, those are highly nutritious. So any time of the growing season, that's going to be good. The older leaves are not nearly as nutritious. Still way better than grasses or most grasses, but not as valuable as the younger, newer leaves.
Is that the same thing with poison ivy? Is it just good at a certain point of year, or is it year round?
That's good at any point. Obviously, it's best during the growing season. Outside of the growing season, it's not as good. So places like where you are, where the growing season is much longer than where you get up north, that's just advantageous. And plants just grow longer, which provides a larger window for deer to have higher quality nutrition. Yes, so any time of the growing season, you're getting higher quality food there than outside of that. Even though they will continue to eat those leaves, even outside of the growing season. But when it's actively growing, younger leaves are always higher quality.
So on the on the greenbrier, and you said blackberries, is there a way you could hurt yourself more than you could help yourself, like letting them get too thick? Is there stuff like that actually hurts you more than it helps at all?
Sure. And anytime that you have an area that is just so thick that deer can't get through it, they're just not going to use it, or they're going to use the edges of it. So when I'm working or designing habitat, whether it's a wooded area and say I am hinge cutting to create cover, I don't want it looking like a tornado inside where it's just so thick that he can't get through. If I can't walk through it a little bit, then it's going to limit what deer will use as well. So what I like to do is when I get into these areas, I want to close down visual view for, I don't want to be able to see more than 20 yards. And then as I'm doing that, a clump of area here, that blocks all that off. But I want to be able to get in and move through that. And if I can get in and move through it a little bit, kind of like a maze without being able to see very far, then deer will use it more as well. So you can absolutely make things too thick, by just dropping trees everywhere. Same thing, with blackberry. If that can get so thick that you can't hardly get through it, then that's going to limit deer use as well. Then it's time to go in and either use an herbicide to kill some of it or take a mulcher in and get rid of something. You have to do something. So, to ask, can you make things too thick for deer? Absolutely. They will use it more than you or I because they can get lower and get in. But if it's that thick, it will absolutely limit the amount of time that they're using it as well.
How advantageous, now that we're talking kind of habitat-y, how advantageous do you think like a heterogeneous landscape across is to people? I have a background in natural resources. That's what I went to school for. So I understand that aspect. But for people that don't, how advantageous would like a landscape like that be?
Very advantageous. Diversity is awesome for deer. I want a mix of, ideally, I would have some woody areas. I'd have some more, open areas. I absolutely want open areas for early successional vegetation. But it's nice to have, some wooded areas. The farther north you get, the more forested environments you need, or from a thermal area where, hey, we get a lot of deep snow, we need some evergreen cover where we can keep a bunch of that snow out. But for much of the whitetails range, we don't even need heavily forested areas. A savanna, which is an area that has a lower amount of trees with herbaceous understory, that's way more valuable than a whole forest. But I like a diversity. I like some woody stuff. I want some of those old fields. I love wetlands. Those are often areas, swamp areas where it's hard to get into, provide a lot of refuge for deer, especially if they have some high areas in them where deer can get out of the water. I want areas, that I can have some food in. So food plots, I like that variety. And then from the wooded end, I want a range of age classes. I want some mature trees, but I also want some very young forest where I have a lot of ground cover and a lot of food at the ground. So heterogeneity is very, very good. That diversity of species, diversity of vegetation types, and diversity of age classes is really, really important for deer.
So on that, we've talked about, you want a good mix of both. So say, what if you have a heavily wooded area? What are some things you can do there to get that diversity?
I'm going to go in and cut trees and or do something to get sunlight to the forest floor. So if you walk into the woods and look straight up, you need to have 30 to 40, I like 40% canopy opening to get enough sunlight to the floor to really get a flush of vegetation. If you let that sunlight hit the ground, things are going to grow. You don't have to plant anything. It's already there in the soil. Things will grow. You just have to open the canopy up enough to allow the sun to do its magic. So you can do that by cutting trees. You can do that by girdling a tree, which is just taking your chainsaw, cutting through the cambium layer and then spraying it with an herbicide. That will kill the tree, but it'll remain standing. But since it doesn't leaf out, the sun can then get past it. You can do that by hinge cutting trees. So there are ways to get, reduce the canopy to get that sun to the forest floor. And that is going to give you that flush of growth from, 0 to 5 feet up, which provides great cover for deer. And that provides a lot of food right down within the feeding zone. So if it's all forested, that's the number one way. Start cutting, start killing some trees, get sunlight to the floor, and let the next generation of forest begin.
So one of the things you keep bringing up is hinge cutting. That's a lot of people say do, some people say don't. It's a hot topic of do or don't. What's behind it that you say to do it? What's the science behind it?
Well, I look at that as one of the tools in the toolbox when I'm doing forest stand improvement, or FSI. TSI, or timber stand improvement, is a very popular term in the forestry world, meaning we are going to go into this forest, we are going to manage it, we're going to cut some trees, remove some things to increase the future revenue potential of the woods. That's TSI. We have just adopted that in the wildlife world where, we are enhancing those woods for the benefit of deer. So rather than calling it TSI, we call it FSI, or forest stand improvement. Let's improve the cover and food content in here from a deer standpoint. And the way that I do that is by either cutting trees, by girdling and spraying trees, by hinge cutting trees, or in most commonly, a combination of all three. So some people get way overboard with the hinge cutting part of it. That's not necessarily, a proper forestry technique to grow higher quality timber in the future, but it absolutely is a good technique to be used to enhance, deer quality or the habitat quality for deer and other wildlife species. So we can use hinge cutting to provide immediate cover in an area. We can use that to direct travel routes for deer by, laying trees in a certain way, to block off some travel areas and direct deer to where your stand is. So I don't go into an area and say, okay, I am purposely going here today to hinge cut a bunch. But what I do is I go into an area and say, I am going to do some FSI work. I am going to provide a really good bedding block here. I'm going to increase the cover for deer. Then I look at what trees are there, the size of the trees, where the trees are arranged and all that. And as I go through, I'm going to cut some, I'll girdle some, and I'll hinge some. I'll use all three of those collectively as I work my way through an area so that when I get done, I have enhanced the quality of it, on say a 5-acre block, so that when I leave, I know deer will be bedding here. And in most cases, deer will be bedding here tonight. I can't tell you how many of our deer steward classes where, we are doing habitat work and we take the students out and show them, where we typically will arrive a day early, do some of this work in the woods so that we can go back and show the students what it looks like. And in almost every case, when we go back the next day, we kick deer out of those areas. So it's not like, oh yeah, if I do this next year, it's better, or 2 years from now, it's better. It literally is better right now. So deer are in there. They take advantage of it almost immediately. And that's pretty rewarding.
Yeah, so I've seen some on hinge cutting, like it works for the article said something about it works for the first like 5 to 8 years. And after that, they said it hurt worse because of the growth from the bottom of the tree growing up. Is that true, or is that just a myth?
Some tree species hinge very well, meaning you cut partway through, the tree will fall over and remain alive. Some don't hinge well at all. They just snap, and then they end up falling. But for the ones that do hinge well, depending on species, they could live for years after that because they will continue to grow shoots and leaves from the part of the tree, that's down, which just can continue to help provide some horizontal structure. They often are not growing from the stump. Some species can send up more shoots from the stump, and that's okay as well. That's food for deer. That's providing other low cover. I have had tremendous success with hinge cutting, but I have absolutely seen people take it way too far.
Yeah.
They try to hinge cut everything. Every species does not hinge cut equally well. And some trees are literally just too big to safely hinge cut. You shouldn't hinge those. Go ahead and fell those or just girdle them and spray them. The one thing too that's nice about being able to cut some down and leave some standing that you girdle and spray is one of the most limiting vegetation features we have, whether it's deer habitat or anything, is standing or down dead wood. Stayed in and stayed out. There's over 100 wildlife species that need snags, standing trees that are dead. Insects, reptiles, think of, birds, woodpeckers, wood ducks, all kinds, squirrels, they need these cavities. So when we're going into areas and enhancing them for deer, girdling and spraying these trees, these are making, one of the most limiting habitat features out there available now across the landscape. So most of this work is done in the name of deer, but man, there are literally hundreds of other wildlife species that benefit from that. So that's why in these areas, I am always girdling and spraying some trees specifically to have snags that are standing there. So I have had the best success by using a combination of felling, girdling, and hinge cut. But I'm with you. I have absolutely seen areas where people just hinge cut way, way too much, made a mess of things, made it so, like deer could barely get through, removed all future timber value of an area. The way that I'm talking about doing this, I'm often choosing the trees that aren't high quality anyway. So when I get done in these areas and these wares, oftentimes the best mass producing trees are left standing. I am killing trees that aren't as good anyway. So when I get done, I have greatly increased the quality of the habitat for deer. And in many cases, it's a higher quality timber stand too, because, I've provided more room for the larger trees in there to grow because I've removed some of the trees that are around the canopy, allow those canopies to spread out, allow the better trees more area to grow. So it's a win-win situation. I've been very successful at doing that.
So on the flip side, if you get a place that doesn't have cover, it's a straight, just short grass, what are some things there you can do to for deer management?
I think that those are a blank canvas, and if I can have an area that if I start with that's all wooded or start with an area that's all open, I'll pick the area that's all open every time because I can make good cover and food on that faster than I can on an area that's all wooded. So with those, number one, early successional vegetation. I am having a bunch of that into that because that provides good cover and it provides good food. So that is an immediate thing. Then certainly can go in there and you can plant trees. I have areas of early successional fields that we have that I have planted a bunch of corridors in, white pine, cedar, other things, whatever happens to be good in your area. And there's probably some of your listeners going, cedar, oh my God, this guy's it. I fully understand how cedar can get out of control. It can be, terrible. But when used in the right place and managed appropriately so that it doesn't get where you don't want it, cedar can provide great travel corridors and some good cover. Just like anything else, too much of it is a bad thing. But so anyway, start with early successional vegetation. You can plant trees, to be able to provide travel corridors, to provide some other structure. So lots of opportunity when you start with that. And it's a lot easier to go from open to then have wooded areas or trees than it is to start with all trees and back that up to old fields. It's way harder to go that way. So I'll take that open area and start from that anytime.
So when trying to establish early successional stage species, are managers, do they need to focus more on just relying on seed bank? Do you think people need to try to find these types of seeds at these millions of different seed companies and try to help, seed in certain areas, like prep it, seed it, or more relying on true management and seed bank type spaces, I guess?
That is a great question. And that's one of the beauties of this is that in the vast majority of the cases, and by this, I mean 95% of the cases, you don't need to plant anything. Everything is right there in the seed bank. There's some pretty cool research out of Penn State University looking at the top 1 inch of soil, numerous study sites in the state. The top 1 inch of soil contains somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 million seeds. they're all right there just waiting for the opportunity to grow. Just as we talked about in the woods where you kill the trees, remove the canopy so the sunlight hits the forest floor, it's the same thing in these fields. We need to, in most cases, kill the grasses because perennial cool season grasses, or in some cases warm season grasses, cover the ground and they get thick. That thatch layer that's there, that covers the soil and it doesn't allow the sun to hit it for all these other seeds to grow. So in the woods where we're killing trees to make this happen, in these old fields, in most cases, we are killing grasses. Once we kill grasses, the sun can get to the ground and then expose all those seeds that are there and allow them to go. So all those seeds are in there, they're there just waiting for the chance. So it's way easier to just spray an herbicide to kill grasses or disc, to disturb those sites. And in general, if we disturb the soil during the dormant season, we encourage more broadleaf plants, which is what we want. When we disturb that soil during the growing season, we encourage more grasses, which is what we don't want. So that's why we want to disturb outside of the growing season or spray the grasses with an herbicide and then just let nature take its course. The sun will hit that. Basically, it greens up within 2 rains. Things start turning green and you're off and running. Now, not everything is going to be good. Some of that comes back is going to be grass. That's okay. We're going to manage that field each year, with the appropriate herbicides or, by, disking during the dormant season or whatever the case is. I have one field on our farm that was in hay for at least 50 years. We hayed it every year. Timothy, fescue, orchard grass, that type of thing. So very prolific cedars. 50 years in hay, and then at least 10 years in rotational pasture, rotational grazing. So, a lot of hay for a long time. I converted that to early successional vegetation about 4 years ago. I continue to battle hay in that, but it's easy. Once a year, I spray it with a grass-based herbicide, and the next year, I have less grass than the year before. Then this year, I'll spray it again. There'll be less grass. And some people say, geez, you've had to spray it like 3 years in a row. It was in hay for over 50 years. You don't think there's an incredible, grass seed bank there? So there is, but you know what? That field is dominated by broadleaf plants today, which is awesome for deer. It's super easy to manage to continue to reduce those grasses. So that's one of the beauties of it. It's so easy to convert them. Now, I said most places are like that. The parts of the United States where I have been where it really helped to plant something are in heavily agricultural areas where, man, this field has been row crop for 30 years. It has had an insane amount of herbicide put on this to grow corn or soybeans. Those areas can have way fewer of these good weed seeds in them than areas that haven't been that intensively managed. So they still have seeds in there that will grow. Those areas I've seen can be jump-started by planting a diverse mix of some of these broadleaf plants. The other area that I have seen that sometimes can help are old mining sites, and basically strip mines, back when they were mined prior to today's mining laws. Meaning today, you take the topsoil off, then they go in and mine, and when you put it back, you have to put the layers back appropriately, and then the topsoil goes back on top. Old mines weren't done that way. Everything just got pushed off. So when it got covered up, the topsoil wasn't necessarily on top. So those areas can be void of some good seeds as well. So, but outside of those two areas, almost everywhere, if you kill the grasses, you immediately are going to have enhanced the quality of that old field for deer. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So real quick, I want to kind of go over, a lot of people don't truly understand how a buck, grows its antlers when it starts, and all that. So if you would you kind of go in detail of like, when does a buck truly start growing its antlers?
So they typically start this time of year in April. They will lose their antlers typically between January and March. They start growing them pretty quickly after that. So usually in April, those antlers will start to grow. It's all driven by photoperiod. There's each day we get a few more minutes of daylight, which is pretty cool. So that's what's affected. So bucks are growing from beginning in April. Hence the reason we want to provide good quality food right now and then they will continue to grow through August. Depending on where you are in the whitetails range. If you get closer to the, extreme southern U.S. or down into South America, close to the equator, they can grow just about year round there. But for most of the United States, they're going to start growing in April. They're going to grow through early August. Then they'll harden during late August and early September. Then they'll be in hard antler usually from September through January to March. But yeah, so there's about somewhere in a 150-day growing window, but it begins right now. So that's why it's to our benefit to make sure, one, we have good habitat out there for them now, and two, we do our job during the deer season to make sure we shoot enough does so that we don't have more deer than those habitats can support. Let's enhance habitats. So we have a bunch of food, and let's shoot enough deer so that deer herd is in balance with what our habitat can support.
So on the bucks growth, I've heard that they know what they're going to be the next year during the year before, and if they don't get enough nutrition, then their body it just kind of confuses it. Is that true, or is that kind of hearsay someone made up?
That's a little bit hearsay. So what happens is, remember we said bucks get heavy in the fall, and then they live off that tissue fat during the winter.
Mm-hmm.
In the spring, the first foods first foods deer eat go to replenish all that body weight they lost last winter. The next foods get to go to body growth for the year, and then anything that's left over goes for antler growth. So deer that go into winter in really good shape and have a pretty easy winter, the next year, they don't have to spend as much spring growth on replenishing body weight that's lost because they didn't lose as much. So more can go for growing for that year. So that's why following a hard winter, a lot of times that next year, antler growth isn't quite as good on average as it was the year before. So bucks know that as they age, I say they know, as bucks age, they can express a larger potential or larger part of their antler growth potential. So it's not necessarily that an individual buck knows that, but if he goes through winter in better shape, he is able to put more resources the next year to that antler growth. And as hunters, of course, we like antlers and we want to see them get bigger. So right. We want to do the best we can, making sure that they go into winter as healthy as can be, have good winter cover, and then get them back on the groceries as soon as possible. The natural groceries, not something that we're pouring out of a bag. Natural groceries as early as possible the next spring.
So you said something pouring out of the bag. A lot of people are tied up with nutrition in the bag. Is that just a kind of like a backup plan in your opinion, or is that can't be a sole focus of a deer's nutrition, right?
That's correct. And even in areas where you do feed, deer do way better on natural feed, natural forages. And that there's a lot of studies out of Texas, that show this, that, first of all, not all deer eat that much supplemental feed. Even on some of those ranches where they have feeders, high density of feeders across the landscape, not all deer eat that much out of them. Some deer, eat a lot more than others. But even in years where you have good rainfall, where you have a lot more native forages, feeder use goes down because those deer would rather eat natural forages as opposed to, protein or, cottonseed or corn or whatever it is in those feeders. So, too many people get too tied up with thinking that you can pour nutrition out of a bag, and you can spend a lot of money and provide nutrition from a bag. You will never do as good as you can managing the habitat and providing more food that way. The people that are successful or most successful with the supplemental feeding are also managing the habitat really well and using a supplemental feeding just as kind of, like the icing on top of the cake. Lots of negative things, associated with that, from disease transmission and, a lot of fighting around those feed sites. So anyway, we don't need to get into all the negative connotations with it, other than to say you are far better off doing everything you possibly can to manage that habitat. You will get way more bang for your buck. It's way less expensive. It's safer for the deer herd, and you'll end up with a higher product at the end of the day going that route.
Well, Kip, I know we're kind of cutting time short here because you got places to be. Where can people find, other videos of what you talk about, and maybe some research if you've, what you've written and all that.
Sure. They can go to our website, which is deerassociation.com. We have all kinds of articles, videos, etc. If they want to see anything specifically I have written, they literally can just type in my name at the search bar and see all the articles that I've written for us over a number of years. Our YouTube channel, you can go to YouTube and go to the National Deer Association. We have lots of videos on there on a lot of things that we talked about today: managing early successional vegetation, managing woods, this forest stand improvement, deer hunting, deer shot placement, anatomy, whatever. We have last year over 2 million unique visitors to our website, which lets us know that we're providing good information. It's all free for the taking, so anybody can grab those. Folks, if they want to have some more hands-on stuff or more personal attention, we do have our deer steward classes that we teach. And actually, I'm going to be in your state this summer teaching a deer steward class, and which is going to be a ton of fun. So anyway, folks can learn about deer steward or see any of those classes on the website as well. But we love to teach. We provide lots of opportunities, and welcome anybody to come grab them and just go make things better for wildlife.
Absolutely. And for anyone listening, that stuff will be definitely linked down in the description below. So check that out. But well, Kip, thanks for coming on today and talking about the importance of nutrition this time of year and deer management, and it is kind of clearing up some of the muddy water for people.
Good deal. No, my pleasure, guys, man. I'm a big fan of Oklahoma. I have spent a lot of time in your state over the years working both in the eastern half of the state and the western half as well. So I really like that western half. I'm more of a get out and away from the towns and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I'm a big fan of your state. So you have a lot of awesome hunting opportunities there, some pretty cool wildlife species. So thanks for having me on. And yeah, I appreciate it. Good luck to all your listeners this year.